good afternoon. It's Monday the 27th of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen for 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We're going to get straight on, lots to get through, and we'll start off with this, that Theresa May is to keep the final Brexit bill secret, fueling fears the final divorce settlement will soar far higher than the £40 billion already offered. This is according to the Daily Mail online. They're saying that Theresa May has agreed to double the exit bill, the bill that we will pay when we leave the European Union, from £20 billion to £40 billion. And they say that she has agreed with Brussels to keep the final deal of the settlement secret. So nobody is going to say exactly how much money is on the table. That's going to be kept secret. So what is really going on here? Well, last Thursday and Friday, was the European Defence Agency conference, and there's our favourite European, Federica Mogherini, the High Representative for the European Union, who said that this European Defence Agency conference was the most important moment for EU defence in decades. She was speaking to 400 people in the audience on this, including people from governments, from armed forces, from industry sector, from other EU institutions, from NATO, from various think tanks, and from the media. The media in Britain, unfortunately, didn't seem to cover this in any great detail. She said that the EU is at the most important moment. This is the most important moment for European defence in decades. Today, we're building a European Union of security and defence. It's not a plan, not a dream anymore, but a reality. All the building blocks of a security and defence union are finally there. We can buy together to ensure that we have all the capabilities we need, whilst also spending efficiently. And we can act together much better than before to manage or prevent crises, to strengthen our partners, and to make sure our citizens are more secure. Because today's security challenges are too big for any of our member states alone. They're too big for any of us as sovereign member states, sovereign states. They're too big for us to deal with, Patrick, so we've got to get together. She says everyone understands this today. Our citizens are asking for more security and more efficient budgets, and the two are only possible if we join forces. And she said that the Council, the Commission and the European Defence Agency have all played their part in shaping the path towards a European Union of security and defence. And she said that PESCO will be central to the success of this whole deal. Only a few days before, we missed this one, I have to admit, the European Defence Agency was holding a workshop on PESCO project proposals. Now, this happened several days after the UK, or after the European Union announced PESCO, and they got their 23 signatures on the agreement. And of course, the UK is not part of this.
They weren't the 24th signature.
They were not the 24th signature.
But we have it on good authority that they were meant to sign that day.
That is correct. That is correct. But they didn't sign. So Boris Johnson said that Britain is the flying buttress to the cathedral of PESCO, if you remember. And so Britain is not taking part in this. Or are they, Patrick? Because in fact, if we look a little bit closer at this image that they've put on this page here, what do we find? We find the United Kingdom well and truly represented in this workshop on PESCO. And this was, as I say, several days after the UK didn't sign the PESCO agreement. So is the UK involved with PESCO, or is it not involved with PESCO? Is the UK coming out of the European Union, or is it not coming out of the European Union? It seems like we are playing a very full role in everything that the European Union is doing in terms of its moves towards a federal superstate. We're not drawing back from that in any way, shape or form, Pat.
So could we draw from this that Boris Johnson not signing, not being the 24th signature at that European meeting a few weeks ago, was that a PR move? Was that a public relations move in order to avoid any sort of immediate backlash and then just continue with the framework and the governance work that they're doing behind the scenes, and only to sign this maybe later? That
is exactly how I see it, Patrick. And when I see then that Theresa May is making agreements about a so-called divorce bill, the details of which are going to be kept secret by both parties, then the question is, what is going to be part of this so-called divorce bill? As we've said several times, they chose PESCO as the mechanism for this because PESCO allows for members to join at a later date. Britain is going to join, I believe. All the signs are there. We are taking a full part in the development of PESCO as it moves forward.
When they said secret divorce bill, Mike, the only things that have been kept secret in terms of big payments in recent years have been what? Bailouts, right? So in a sense, this is type of a bailout for Brussels or some sort of extortion payment.
Well, it's certainly keeping Brussels sweet while we deal with our domestic politics.
I didn't realize that the EU membership was like a mobile phone contract. If you terminate early, you have to pay for all the months until the end of the contract. That's not actually in the Lisbon Treaty, is it?
No, but Theresa May has promised that, so there you go.
Interesting.
In the meantime, getting back to the European Defence Agency conference at the end of last week, they were focusing on cyber, which they say is a persistent strategic challenge, Patrick. High-level panellists in the first roundtable were the commander of Estonia's defence forces, a representative from Airbus, the commander of the German Cyber and Information Space Command, NATO was represented, Rolls-Royce was represented, and the Proximus Director of Security Governance and Investigations. So there you go. They discussed a number of key questions: how far do EU member states share cyber threat assessments, how are national governments tailoring their responses and increasing their preparedness levels, how should European institutions support member states in their efforts to navigate the myriad of initiatives linked to cybersecurity and cyber defence. So this was the focus of the European Defence Agency on Friday. So it should come as no surprise then to anybody, if they've listened to what we've said in the last few minutes, that Britain has decided that it is going to remove funding from certain areas of the British defence budget and put it into cyber security. So this headline from the Telegraph here saying Armed Forces denied extra funding as cash diverted to cyber warfare by advisor determined to screw over MOD. This is not anybody screwing over the Ministry of Defence. This is simply policy which is being driven at the European level. We're seeing the outcome of that with money being diverted into this area.
So what's the Telegraph, what's the mainstream media doing here? They're trying to frame this into sort of some internal battle, some internal intrigue. It's kind of a diversion to mislead the public in a way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Don't we see the media do this constantly, Mike? They do not want people to look at sort of overarching policies. They want people to sort of focus on little minutiae of the little infighting between sort of apparently petty power politics within agencies and institutions. So meanwhile, the agenda rolls forward.
Absolutely, and it also rolls forward through this. The government has announced its new industrial strategy today. Well, what are they talking about? Throughout 2017, they say they work on the foundations of the work on the foundations of the industrial strategy has been building. So they launched a green paper. They launched a review of artificial intelligence. They're scaling up a task force in this area. They're investing in bioscience. It's all cybersecurity, AI, biological, biosciences, and so on. And so they are looking at launching what they're calling an ambitious industrial strategy. They're going to invest a further £725 million in this. This is on top of what they're saying is previously committed £1 billion in the first wave of the industrial strategy challenge projects. There are 4 challenge projects, 4 grand challenges as they are describing them. The first one is artificial intelligence. They're saying that the rise of AI is changing the world we live in. The UK has to be at the forefront of this data-driven revolution. They're talking about green growth. They're talking about aging society because they've got a lot of old people that they've got to get killed off and clean up afterwards. So they're looking at the challenges of the aging population, aging society. Future mobility from driverless cars to drone-delivered goods. The way we move people, goods and services is evolving rapidly, and the UK needs to be a world leader in shaping what the future of mobility will look like. So these are the 4 grand challenges behind the industrial strategy. Greg Clark had this to say: the way we earn and live our lives as workers, citizens and consumers is being transformed by these new technologies. So that's good. And everywhere you look, we've got this in the presses of the Times. Matt Hancock, who is the digital minister, of course, is writing articles. An article for the Times: artificial intelligence is bringing changes which we must harness for the good. Do you see any signs, Patrick, that artificial intelligence is being harnessed for the good at this point?
Well, I'm going to have to say that if they want to be if Britain wanted to be at the forefront of this industry, and they're sort of, or Europe, they've only got a few hundred million to throw around. I think they're already like way behind China and the United States are probably about 10 plus 20 years ahead of Britain and Europe anyway. So I don't expect that they're going to catch up, Mike, at all.
Yeah.
Actually, this whatever this is in terms of industrial wave is going to be driven a lot from the east and not as much from the west. Well,
perhaps since we're speaking about artificial intelligence, Patrick, we should bring Sophia back on screen. Now, you spoke about Sophia at the recent AV 8.1 conference. She, of course, has received her citizenship from Saudi Arabia. Well, now she wants to start a family. And I have to say that the coverage in the mainstream press of this, the word you used earlier was gushing. It is disgusting, actually.
Yeah, well, the tech press is gushing. Of course, this is Dubai hosting this event on the back of the Saudi Arabia Technology Summit there, where they offered offered a passport and Saudi citizenship. What a I guess she drew the short straw, Mike, to get a Saudi passport. She won't be able to drive, firstly. But anyway, so there it is in Dubai, and so this is the world's first celebrity android, basically, Mike.
With no legs, it's only half an android.
Developed by Hanson Robotics, and guess where they're based? They moved from Texas to China.
Right.
Right. So China's at the forefront of this technology, but it won't be long, Mike, until there'll be many others doing more or less the same thing. But there's a lot of industries on the back end of this already waiting to get online, Mike. So
right. So the reason we've chosen the College Times here from Dubai is because they decided that they would go and interview this robot, well, the impression which most of the mainstream media is giving is that this is some kind of sentient being that's capable of having a rational human-level conversation. But, you know, people have been demonstrating so-called rational human-level conversations with electronic devices for a long time. There was nothing impressive about this in any way, shape, or form.
No.
But I'm deeply disturbed at the way this is being presented in the press.
And the mainstream media have had these sort of androids working as TV anchors for years, Mike. And not many people can tell the difference.
This is a very important point, Patrick, because RT here saying that sex bots are coming. Scientists say digisexuals are inevitable as more people bond with robots. And the thing, as I say, the thing that concerns me most about this is if we look at the mainstream culture, mainstream press, look at celebrity culture at the moment. Mm-hmm. Celebrities are spending all their time turning their faces into plastic. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing, what the Western world seems to be doing at the moment is presenting an idea of beauty and humanity, which is made of plastic, because most of these celebrities have plastic faces. We are not going to be able to tell the difference between a celebrity and a sex doll in the not too distant future.
At some point, and I said in my talk in Covent Garden, two things I put out. That was 2 months ago, by the way. I said that the sex bot industry already, it's a $30 billion global industry. So that's enough to attract quite a lot of investment, and a lot of people want to get into that game, and not just female sex bots, Mike, but some industry experts project that the market for male sex bots for women's entertainment is going to be bigger, in fact, than the men's. So it's not just a male thing in terms of a product. The other thing I said, Mike, is that I showed that these robots are celebrities. And I even showed an interview where a journalist took Sophia, that particular android, and took it on a driverless car on the Autobahn in Germany. and interviewed the bot about their experience in a driverless car. And I made the comment as well to you yesterday on the Sunday Wire that it won't be long until that journalist is also an AI bot one day. So then there's absolutely no humans involved in this bit of entertainment. So maybe they'll be entertaining themselves as well one day. So is there really any need for humans in this dystopic future? It doesn't look like it.
No, no, indeed. Well, let's move on. Well, this is Vanity Fair exclusive, apparently. What Trump really told Kislyak after Comey was canned.
And Lavrov as well. So this is a meeting here. So
so the Russians are at it here with Trump, is that right?
Well, when the Russians went to visit Trump earlier in the fall, much was made about the fact that Russian photographers were allowed to take pictures and the U.S. weren't. So what did Trump say to the Russians behind closed doors during that? And so Howard Bloom is the author of that article. And if you go back there, they're basically accusing Donald Trump of leaking intelligence, secret intelligence, which was given to the U.S. apparently from the Israelis about ISIS. That apparently Israel claims they had an undercover agent or a double agent or spy or embed in ISIS who gave intel about laptop bombs, which went on to sort of, you saw the laptop ban in airports. That was supposedly based on this intelligence. So this was a violation by Donald Trump by talking to the Russians about this. This is somehow a violation of U.S.-Israeli trust. Okay, and so they're saying. Also, I might add, we found out as well that before the inauguration, Obama officials warned Israel to be careful with sharing any intelligence with the Trump White House. This is how bad.
Sorry, run that by me again. The Obama White House contacted the Israelis and said, do not share intelligence with the Trump White House.
Before the inauguration.
Wow.
So they were already trying to put the president behind. I mean, this is like really serious. So now we find out, Mike, that Al Jazeera released a report after this saying that it wasn't an Israeli intel agent. It was a Jordanian who supplied this information. And who had this agent or an ISIS spy feeding the information. So easily, Mike, this plot could have been cooked up by the intelligence services, or it could have been written by the sort of script writing team at CNN who invented the Khorasan group and all these other sort of terrorist menaces over the last couple of years. So we don't know exactly what is true and what's not. And so this Vanity Fair piece is also a hit piece on Trump. So it's trying to make Trump look bad. So my question is this: why would do the Russians need any intel about Syria at all? I mean, even if it was true, they have mountains of intelligence about ISIS, because Russia's actually in Syria working with the Syrian government at the invitation of the Syrian government. They're actually legally in Syria, unlike the United States and unlike Israel, whatever it feels like its business is. So that's interesting. And by the way, the president can't leak this as intelligence to the Russians. As a president of the United States, it's within his discretion to share whatever he wants.
With anyone? With
any other head of state. And certainly if they have a mutual interest in defeating ISIS, which one would hope they would, Mike, then that would have been fair game. Not that it was any big secret, or what exactly was it? Jordanian intelligence? So I don't know what exactly is going on here, Mike. So it seems like a bit of fiction. So let's in terms of sharing intelligence with the Israelis, with the United States, Israel has a kind of a history, Mike, of spying on the United States. Not just 1, 2, or 3 examples when we have this U.S. arrest of 200 young Israelis here, 2002. You can see that in that Telegraph article there. And then we have other reports, including Jerusalem Post, Israeli espionage hushed up by White House officials, and we have the Franklin affair. This was also broken in the early 2000s. This is Israeli spying within the Pentagon. And then we have the case of Jonathan Pollard, naval intelligence person as well, and so that was a big high-profile Israeli espionage case where you have Al Gore's phone being tapped in '98. We've got Zalman Shapiro supplying uranium, which was stolen from the U.S. and given to Israel in the early 60s. So it's on and on and on. So what is all this spying that Israel does on the United States, which doesn't get a lot of great media coverage generally because nobody likes to talk about it? What's it all about, Mike? Why would Israel want to be spying on their best buddy, the United States? And there can only be one answer to that, and that is blackmail. And so here's this book, which a lot of people didn't pick up on recently, which was Clinton Incorporated, The Audacious
Rebuilding of a Political Machine.
Rebuilding of a Political Machine by Daniel Halper.
Yeah.
What is in this book, Mike, is explosive. Bill Clinton blackmailed by Benjamin Netanyahu over the Monica Lewinsky sex tapes, and we published this article a few years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, this didn't get much coverage at all in the mainstream media because it was highly verboten for many reasons, because it came out during sort of Hillary's presidential run, as it were. So there's blackmail there by Israel over the U.S. So, by the way, Ehud Barak, who was Israeli prime minister, just on the back end of that Monica Lewinsky scandal, he was on the flight manifests to Jeffrey Epstein's private island, Little St. James, with Bill Clinton also on those flight manifests. I thought I'd just point that out.
Yep.
So what is that all about?
Blackmail. Yes. Okay. Well, let's get back to Russia then, because NATO has produced a new document. It's called Robo-Trolling, and in this document, Patrick, they're highlighting, they're saying that Russian language bots create roughly 70% of all Russian messages about NATO in the Baltic states and in Poland, and they've produced a nice little infographic, or it's actually if you go to the website, it's an interactive sort of thing. You can see the breadth and the depth of the mostly in Cyrillic, so you probably won't be able to read much of it. But this is pretty incredible, Patrick, because the hysteria over Russia continues to build. NATO pushing this rubbish out. Just look at the image that they choose for the front page of that. We've got some kind of cyborg there typing on a keyboard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's fantastic. But this has got to take the biscuit for the most spectacular piece of fake news I've seen out of the mainstream media for some time. This is The Sun today saying Russian cyber units spreading slurs online about flu and measles jabs in the UK, right? So
flu lies, it says. Flu lies.
Flu lies. So anybody that is campaigning now on the issue of vaccinations is now a Russian asset, and well, there you go. What can you say?
So with all this uproar about fake news, and nobody with half a brain can look at this story and see what an absolute piece of garbage it is, run by one of Rupert Murdoch's flagship titles, I might add. Is this not fake news? But what is the point of this story, Mike? It's just more propaganda, which is anti-Russian propaganda, which buttresses, as Boris Johnson would say, like a flying buttress, holding up NATO and European dodgy policy, which is basically to hold sanctions in place against Russia and to expand eastward in what Theresa May calls our eastern neighborhood.
Absolutely. So
Yes.
Let's look at who wrote this article. There she is. Holly wrote this article.
Straight out of college.
Well,
maybe not.
I don't know, but it is incredible. Holly, you should be proud of yourself. I'm not even, what is it, Holly Christodoulou or something? I don't know.
She's very active on Twitter as well, 340 followers.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Very good.
There you go, the height of British reporting.
She's a crack reporter for The Sun, and good job.
Yep. Okay, what's George Monbiot been saying, Patrick?
Well, George Monbiot is sort of he's retweeted this article which accuses the likes of John Pilger and another high-profile person whose name just escaped me a minute ago. I think we spoke before the show about it. So he is basically saying genocide revisionists, they're calling them, war crimes revisionists. So anyone who questions the official party line on the International Criminal Court trials against the Serbian generals for these Srebrenica massacre and others, basically they are just genocide deniers. So this is akin to being a Holocaust denier or a climate change denier. This is the genocide denier. And if you actually look into these cases, Mike, it's really not easy to call any of these genocide with regards to the Yugoslavian war. I know the media has already used this term ad nauseum, but you look at the actual cases. In the case of the so-called ethnic Albanians in Kosovo, the 100,000 that the media claimed were massacred in a genocide, they're still investigating it today, Mike.
Yeah.
And the numbers they're talking about are like 3,000, 4,000. And they're surmising that a number of those were combatants, Mike. So if there's a war going on and a lot of people died in whatever way, even if it was mass executions, okay, to call this genocide.
So why are we not calling what happened in Iraq or Libya a genocide under those circumstances?
I think we can call it that, but the problem is the persons who are running the narrative on Iraq and those other Libya, those are Western media and Western institutions, so they will not use the word genocide for any acts done by their hand, only by the sort of the evil axis of evil or the despot evil characters.
Okay, so the theme here on this section is how the media is playing this stuff. So let's have a look at this in the Daily Mail, because the Daily Mail has seen fit to publish an article by Nick Robinson from the BBC. The headline is "Vladimir Putin is using fake news just like tanks and missiles." And from Brexit to Catalonia, his goal is to weaken the West. I think the West is doing a fairly good job of weakening itself, myself. But Nick Robinson wants to push out this type of fake news. It is an incredible article.
I don't know why Nick Robinson seems to have been delegated this task of sort of railing and crusading for the great journalistic principles of the BBC and how we need to preserve those and how we need to wage war to protect ourselves from the evil Russians. And in terms of Brexit and Catalonia, can anybody, including Nick Robinson, can anybody with a straight face tell me that Vladimir Putin or Russia, the Russians, had anything to do with people in Britain voting for Brexit?
This is the narrative that Theresa May is trying to push.
Because if we were both here for that campaign, Mike,
absolutely,
the mainstream media was completely Remain, almost on every front, bar one newspaper, I think, and the media was gamed as well. The political party in power were completely Remain. David Cameron was running that campaign, got more than equal time on that issue.
Well, okay. I mean, I don't know what the budget of RT is. But we do know that the budget of the BBC is almost £4 billion a year. And you add to that the budgets of the Times and the Guardian and the Mail and all the other...
Channel 4,
yeah,
ITV, and the list goes on and on. The Huffington Post, Mike, and I could just go on and on, okay? The annual budget of RT, the annual budget, that's for RT Arabic, RT Spanish, RT America, RT International, RT in Germany. The annual budget, I believe, according to the numbers that we saw a few months ago, is 340-something million annually.
Is that dollars or pounds?
That's dollars for the whole world.
So,
okay, it's a tiny budget if you compare it to just the BBC, but collectively with all the other mainstream outlets that were pushing Remain.
So if Nick Robinson is seriously suggesting that Vladimir Putin is using Russia Today and Sputnik to push out propaganda to the degree that they can swing elections and swing referenda, he should be ashamed of himself with his £4 billion budget that he can't counteract that. It's
the same fallacious argument that Hillary Clinton supporters are pushing with Russiagate, Mike, and that's that somehow RT and Sputnik somehow convinced people to vote for Trump. The point is, Mike, people who read RT or go to RT or Sputnik to get information and news, they would have already made up their mind which way they're voting anyway, Mike, on that issue, whether that's for Donald Trump or Brexit. It's kind of a common sense issue for them, so they see it as a sort of rooted political issue. So if they think that they're going to somehow swing the vote, what they are upset, what the BBC, what Nick Robinson's upset about, is that RT has been reporting world events truthfully and accurately for many years now, where the BBC has been spinning them and obfuscating world events, in some cases pushing out actual fake news, specifically with regards to Syria, Mike. So maybe that's what Nick Robinson's really upset about or trying to protect.
But this seems to be something that he's been on for quite some time. I think this is September. This time in the BBC itself is guerrilla war being waged on news broadcasters. But I mean, so this is a theme through some of his writing for the last several months.
Sure, this is a big gushing op-ed that Nick Robertson did. And he's basically talking about the Fourth Estate and the press. Excuse me, Mike, but the BBC is a state-run broadcaster.
Yes.
Even though they have to extort money out of the public to pay for it.
Well, they have the full backing of the government to extort that money. That is a tax, effectively.
It's effectively, yeah. It's a tax by force.
Yeah.
So you have a TV license, and you have these enforcement officers going around to collect it to pay for programming that most people probably don't want to watch. But anyway, so he's saying that we need to, the values of the BBC. The BBC is not the Fourth Estate. They are not the press. Everyone knows by now that BBC is there to protect the government, to protect the state, to protect the party who's ruling at the moment, which is the Conservative Party. It's effectively a single-party state in many ways that we have. A lot of people would agree with me on that. We saw the emails from the MPs last week that were copied and pasted, the same emails as response to different constituents. So, so the BBC is there to protect the establishment, to protect the state. They will rarely challenge, if ever, unless it's for little expenses or something like someone fiddled their MP's expenses, then maybe there'll be some big expose there. But aside from that, in terms of rank corruption, like governments arming and training terrorists in Syria, they're not going to get much from the BBC on that front, I think. But you do have a chance to get that from independent press or even commercial media outlets. And the fact that RT has been challenging on so many of those fronts, I'm sure that's really upset quite a lot of people who are involved in the actual illegal subterfuge in some of these operations like Syria and Libya, countries like Britain, like France, like the United States, like many other EU member states and NATO member states, are involved in actual illegal subterfuge, undermining governments, undermining states.
Well, we know that the BBC is with BBC Media Action, for example. But I mean, his allegation is that Russia trying to affect what's going on in foreign countries by pushing propaganda. The BBC would never do that, Patrick.
Of course they wouldn't.
But, so they didn't do it in 2002 when they were running headlines like Iraq sought African uranium
Yellow cake
and
uranium.
Iraq weapons dossier at a glance.
Yeah.
So they took the dossier that Tony Blair had pushed out to justify going to war, and they published it in full. And not only did they publish it in full, but they created articles like this, which were summaries of the full dossier. So they did the whole works.
So hold those up on screen, Mike. And so people like Nick Robertson from the BBC, Robinson,
yeah.
Nick Robinson from the BBC are basically saying that RT or the Russian Kremlin propaganda outlets amplifying fake news and so forth. What is the BBC doing here in the run-up to the Iraq War? One of the biggest military lies and disasters in modern history, Mike.
Yeah.
In modern history, right here, the BBC are amplifying a fictitious narrative stitched together by the intelligence agencies, sexed up to no end, okay, amplifying fake news in order to start a war. That's what the BBC are doing there. History has proven that out. Unless Nick wants to debate that point.
Well, indeed, and he's welcome to. He is absolutely welcome to. Let's not forget this. Saving Syria's Children. Yes. Anybody wants to understand the background to this, get onto Robert Stewart's blog. Just type Robert Stewart and Saving Syria's Children into your search engine of choice, and you will get his website. This is spectacular stuff, Patrick.
Yes, this is after a chemical attack, Mike.
Allegedly. And remember the timing of this, just after the vote by members of Parliament in 2013 on whether we were going to bomb Syria or not. This was designed to affect public opinion following that vote. They fully expected that vote would be won. In fact, it was lost, so it was a bit unfortunate for them, but there you go.
A little turn of history there.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, when RT tried to do some kind of expose on Saving Syria's Children, Ofcom, the regulator, backed up the BBC.
Sure. There was a show called Truth Seeker, which was on RT, and in this case here you flagged up. They had a little clip of this, basically criticizing. Actually, they're accurate. The BBC had changed the audio on Dr. Rolla Hallam.
Hallam, yeah.
And they did change the audio, which is blatantly doctoring some scene. And they're saying there was some journalistic license to defend themselves. So the state broadcaster has the state regulator basically looking after each other in this case, which was actually, they did call out something that was actually had been changed, had been altered. So they had a case there. I think this was about the Truth Seeker, Saving Serious Children segment. I think that's what it was about. But there was an Ofcom complaint on that at the time. And so what exactly were we looking at here in terms of an arrangement with the state-run broadcaster, which is the BBC, and the state regulator, Ofcom, seem to be somehow maybe working towards the same end.
And increasingly it's getting more dangerous because, of course, we have that arrangement, and apparently now we're seeing more and more of an arrangement between the state and the technology companies to restrict what information we get access to on the internet. So, you know, we should highlight this because this goes alongside with the net neutrality debate as well. This all seems to be coming together into the perfect storm at the moment. But Kim Dotcom, now he is, of course, a publicity seeker with lots of money, but I have to say he has done a pretty good job at staving off the authorities so far for what he has done in the past. And they are dying to get their hands on him for copyright infringement and all kinds of other stuff. But he's talking about now creating an alternative internet because he's concerned about these issues as well. Now, of course, the problem for him is that he's very wealthy, of course, but he doesn't have the resources to build an alternative physical internet. So he's got whatever he does is going to be piggybacking on top of the infrastructure that belongs to the technology companies. And the technology companies, of course, are at the center of this whole net neutrality debate. And the question is, how far are companies in the West, technology companies and governments, going to go to restrict access to certain types of traffic on the internet? They're quite happy to criticize the Chinese for the Great Firewall of China. But whatever he does, whatever protocols he builds his new system on, he's going to always be in a fight to try to make sure that that governments and corporations don't simply block whatever he's trying to build. So it's going to be an interesting fight, Patrick, around net neutrality, around censorship on the internet, and it's one that really everybody needs to get engaged in. Yeah,
the net neutrality issue is very important. It's central to what we do. I think it's also central to what so many other people do, and to give away the bandwidth, let's say, Mike, to maybe 5 or 6 major corporations. This is not going to be a good precedent, and I don't think you'll be able to take that back.
No.
Once that's given away, and that people should just take note of that. That's something to consider.
Okay, so a few foreign policy news, just short, quick news reports. NATO and Ukraine were meeting following this was following the EU Eastern Partnership meeting last week. This is Stoltenberg meeting with Poroshenko to discuss the so-called ongoing security challenges in Ukraine. Of course, more anti-Russia stuff going on here. They're really just trying to build the network. Now, I think yesterday on the Sunday Wire, Patrick, you were complaining bitterly that that Daesh, ISIS, whatever you want to call it, had been defeated, but we almost knew nothing about it in the mainstream press. You'll be glad to know that the government was pushing this out today. So Daesh in disarray, apparently with dripping letters and
Halloween graphic from the government.
Halloween graphic, a little bit late. They're
creative.
Saying that in October, Daesh propaganda output was 85% less than it was at its peak in August 2015.
Oh, fantastic!
And this is all because of the work of the Global Coalition.
Well, it's true, and especially if the Global Coalition has been putting out Daesh propaganda, Mike.
That's exactly what yes.
That must mean that Site Intelligence must have been closed for the month. Maybe that's why it dropped so much. But congratulations to the creative department of the government for the nice Halloween font on the Daesh in disarray. I think that's very professional and definitely befitting of a major superpower.
Yes.
Well done.
Well done.
Well done.
Yeah. Now, on more serious issues, just briefly, United Nations saying 11 million Yemen children desperately need aid. I just say again, I'm very concerned about the way that Yemen is being used at the moment. I'm not clear exactly what the narrative is going to be. The BBC has suddenly, having ignored Yemen for the last few years, has decided that it's going to do a Syria-like. It's running more and more Syria-style reports on Yemen. Comments, diaries from doctors, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. We saw this type of stuff from Syria. The Yemeni situation needs to be dealt with, and Britain right at the heart of that policy.
Sure. So what's happening in Yemen is interesting. So in terms of Syria, the Western media could only get on the ground in so-called rebel-held areas, or what we now know are terrorist-held areas, Mike. So in terms of controlling the narrative, it's kind of difficult. In Yemen, the Western media would like to get, I'm talking about the UK and the US, would like to get into demonize the Houthis, which they're going to say are Iranian-backed, and then sort of blame everything and cause this sort of daisy chain of causation to Tehran in order to back sort of a wider aggressive geopolitical stance against Iran, and then join arms with their brothers in arms in Saudi Arabia and Israel and so forth. And then we have the stages that are required for the run-up to maybe a larger war down the road. So that's what the media would like to do. The problem is, Mike, they can't get in to some of these areas in Yemen in order to create facts on the ground. And they had the same problem in Syria. So what this resulted in Syria, Mike, was that the West lost. Essentially in Syria, and their terrorist proxies lost because they couldn't create facts on the ground, media-wise. And so they're running into the same problem in Yemen. And you know what they call Yemen is one of the nicknames of Yemen is the graveyard of invaders. And it could very well happen again. So they're going to have to change tact on this, Mike. And the problem is the U.S. and the U.K. governments are up to their neck in complicity and collusion with the Saudi Arabian government in terms of arming them and giving military assistance in the sort of slaughter of thousands of innocent Yemenis, and the embargo that's causing untold suffering and death in that country, which is a direct result of the political support by the United States and the UK in that arrangement with Saudi Arabia. Absolutely,
and the embargo, of course, is stopping aid, including UK aid, from getting in. Right. But Penny Mordaunt, the new International Development Secretary, not too worried about that because she's been over in Bangladesh looking at the camps for the Rohingya, and she visited Cox's Bazar, which is on the coast in Bangladesh, and she has announced more UK aid for the Rohingya crisis. So I think what we are likely to see there is an escalation of the trouble in that part of the world if the UK is going to pump more money into it. She said that the UK will continue to stand by the Rohingya people and Bangladesh now and in the future. She apparently met some of what they say are 620,000 people now driven from their homes in Burma, and so they've announced a further £12 million for the Rohingya crisis. Penny Mordaunt said the persistent persecution of the Rohingya people must stop. It's horrifying that hundreds of thousands of innocent people have had their homes burnt to the ground, and parents have been forced to helplessly watch as their children die from hunger. This looks like ethnic cleansing. Well, I suppose the British would recognise it if they see it. They've been party to many examples of it over the years. The Burmese military must end this inhumane violence and guarantee unrestricted humanitarian access.
Take that script, Mike, and replace Burma with Syria government, or just take that script, and it's almost like it's a copy and paste of what we saw in the early days of the Syrian conflict.
That is the bit that concerns me most. And when she says that UK aid is being pumped into this, what's it being pumped in for? We don't get any transparency on where the money is actually going at the end of the day. It's not going to these people, I believe.
And if you see any white helmets in Burma, in these areas like Cox's Bazar, then you know that some real trouble is coming.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Oh, by the way, I just want to give a shout out. We found, this is from Workhouse in the chat room. Workhouse said, my smart toaster burnt both sides of the toast this morning, and having read today's newspaper, and so I can immediately believe that my toaster was hacked by the Russians. And so how can we call ourselves a sovereign country if Russia can burn our toast? Yes. And he's got such a very good point there, Workhouse.
Thanks for joining us. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. tomorrow. Bye-bye.